you and I have to take responsibility for stopping global warming. So I put that idea out there. So let's see how many people believe in global warming. Show of hands. Anybody doesn't believe in global warming? So we're, okay. So science says global warming is unequivocal. The polling, the national polling of people show that between 60 and 80% of the public believes in global warming. Second question, how many believe that man's the cause of global warming? Show of hands. Again, a pretty good degree. Anybody doesn't believe that? So we're all on the same track so far. Science says that man's the cause of global warming mainly by using fossil fuels and deforestation. And the public, generally speaking, doesn't get over 40% on that. Less than 40% usually believe that man's the cause of global warming. So that's kind of the science outlook and the polling outlook. What I want to talk about is why it's important to deal with this and what we can do. So the summary of why it's important is it's unacceptable. The conditions that are going to end up because of global warming are unacceptable for the whole planet. So why is it unacceptable? Okay, this is going to be too hard for anybody to see here. Okay, it's not meant to be read in detail by anybody in the audience, but the point of this is that there are many consequences of global warming / climate change, and as the climate increases, going from the left to the right, every one of those consequences gets greater. So that's, even though you can't see the detail, everything on this list from the 2007 climate reports are negative consequences of global warming. Second thing I want you to note, the circles around the number 2, that's the globally agreed upon threshold to try to keep global warming below. So we're already going to have some bad consequences. So the other thing that I need to tell you about here is the things on this chart are called business as usual. So if we continue using fossil fuels, it is what the scientists call non-mitigation. So everything on this chart happens if we continue to use fossil fuels. So that's all bad, and it's really hard for you to see all the detail here, okay? So I want to make it a little more visually easy to see. So here's a picture of the temperature of the United States, and what you can say that the red parts are deserts. The more red it is, the more the desert happens. So if we allow global warming to continue, by the end of this century, this is what the United States will look like in terms of deserts. That should scare you. That's the reason you want to stop global warming. If you stop by this afternoon, I give you some reference materials about that, or I believe I actually have it on my handout. There's a report about what will happen in just 20 to 30 years in terms of producing food because of this kind of situation. So, next I want to tell you about, it's bad. If we don't stop it, it's bad. Everybody understands that. Let's tell you why it's even worse than you think it was. You know what momentum is? If you have a train that sees a car on the tracks down the road, down the tracks, There's a lot of momentum in that train. It's not going to be able to stop. That's what momentum is. If you were on a bike, you wouldn't have much momentum because there's not a lot of weight. If you're in a car, you'd have a little more momentum. If you're in a train, you'd have a lot. So the way a train engineer deals with momentum is he shuts down the throttle and puts on the brake. And because of momentum, it only slows that train down a little, lest that car gets off the tracks. It's road. So, the equivalent for global warming is that we're using fossil fuels. And if we don't stop using fossil fuels, then we're continuing down the same road. So, the equivalent of the throttle for global warming, the throttle that the engineer has on the train, is to stop using fossil fuels. Now the throttle was easy to use in the train. Bingo. Shut the throttle down, there's no more power going through the wheels. Not so easy with global warming. You have to stop using fossil fuels over a long period of time. Otherwise, your standard of living goes right out the window. So that's one difference about the throttle. The second difference about the throttle is that the throttle on global warming is that when you put the carbon dioxide up in the atmosphere, it stays there for a long time. So it's not like the train, when he stopped the power immediately to the wheels. When we put carbon dioxide up in the atmosphere, it's going to be there for a long time. So it's not stopping right away. That adds to the momentum. So in the train, the conductor, the engineer, was able to put on the brakes. The equivalent for global warming is a thing called geoengineering. Geoengineering has a lot of potential problems to it. How many here are familiar with the precautionary principle? Okay, a few. You probably know it better by the term do no harm. That's the precautionary principle for a doctor. Okay, but the precautionary principle is one that we ought to use in terms of geoengineering. We don't really have a good break because if you do things, like for instance, you reduce the amount of energy coming from the sun, then you can't grow food. So the reason we're getting hot is we got all this energy coming from the sun. You want to reduce the heating, you reduce the amount of sun, you reduce the amount of food. So there are problems with the geoengineering, the braking system. So momentum is a problem for global warming. Global warming is going to be with us for a long, long time. In case of the sea levels, it's going to be with us for thousands of years. There's that much momentum in the system. So, okay. Now I want to talk about the global warming. The problems that we're going to have are big, and we want to stop them. We have momentum, which is going to continue the global warming for a long period of time. This means that we need to start stopping it now, not later, but now. So I want to give you some relative information. Thank you. If I can find my quote here, I want to read it. Okay, what I'm trying to do is to give you a sense of how important global warming is relative to other things, okay? And I'm going to read you a quote, by the way, it's on the handout on the back of the second page. Climate is the granddaddy of all environmental problems. Everything we do on these other issues, local pollution, wildlife preservation, rivers and oceans, is going to be for nothing if we don't solve the big one. So if you're thinking about an environmental problem, global warming comes first. If we don't solve that one, Even if we cleaned up the river, when global warming comes, it's going to destroy the rest of the planet. So you have to give some high priority to stopping global warming. By the way, that same concept is also true of social justice. The largest single social justice issue in the world forever is global warming. The poorest people in the world do not cause global warming. They don't use a lot of energy. The poorest people in the world will not be able to adapt to global warming. They are going to pay the biggest price. It's the biggest social justice issue ever. So, now I want to kind of transition from it's a problem, why it's a problem, because it's going to destroy the planet for mankind. I showed you how the desert in the United States will become a desert. So that should impress you about how it's a big problem. Momentum is going to make that problem last for a long time. That's the reason you have to stop now. And the biggest problem and needs to take priority over a lot of other things. So the question is, what can you do about it? So it's really very simple, but it's complex or difficult to solve. It's simple in, here's the economics of solving the problem. And again, this is another quote that's on the handout. Economics teaches us that it is unrealistic to hope that major reductions in emissions can be achieved by hope, trust, responsible citizenship, environmental ethics, or guilt alone. The only way to have major and durable effects is to raise the price of carbon emissions. So basically what that means is that if you use the economic system that we have and you raise the price of carbon, that will reduce the use of fossil fuels, which is the cause of global warming. The additional fossil fuels, the carbon dioxide that goes up in the atmosphere, is what causes global warming. The system that we have that created a wonderful, large amount of standard of living for maybe about a third of the world's population is that market system. We change that market system by putting a price on carbon, and you start to solve the problem. So that's the simple part. The hard part is how do you get that done? And here's a quote. Again, it's a one-for-one quote. The scientists can't make these decisions for us. Governments can't make the decisions for us, or won't, because the task is too great, and especially because our legislators and government agencies are under too much pressure from the special interests which cripple them. In fact, we will have to be the ones to force government to act. And it sounds like something that somebody wrote recently. However, that quote is from 1991 out of a book called Our Angry Earth. And it projected or forecast the situation we have. And somebody earlier on mentioned that there's a dysfunctional government, and that's the reason that we have to take responsibility to solve global warming. If we don't take responsibility to solve global warming, the momentum of it is going to just destroy the planet. The little red desert that used to be will be this if we don't stop global warming. So I have some handouts, and if somebody could help distribute these. I have a couple other things that I might cover in my, how many more minutes do I have, Ellen?
4 minutes.
Okay, so in 4 minutes. Let me summarize by reading. The summary. The science. Global warming is unequivocal and is caused by man's use of fossil fuels and deforestation. The consequences are drastic. They're highlighted on the first chart that I showed to you, and they continue if we have business as usual, which is we don't stop using fossil fuels. Then I showed you the result. Momentum is going to make this problem last for a long time, and that means you have to start stopping it now because of momentum. The relative importance of stopping it, it's high. It's higher than almost any other thing you can think of. It doesn't mean you shouldn't do other things. It just means that you have to stop global warming, or your kids or your grandkids are going to pay a terrible price. The solution of what needs to be done was pretty simple. You have to have national climate legislation that restricts the use of fossil fuels. It puts a price on carbon. And how do we do that? Just like I started out. You and I, have to take responsibility for stopping global warming. It means we have to do the same thing I'm doing here and make sure that a lot of other people understand it. And this should have raised some questions, and if it did, I'd like to see you at 4:30 and do more. I'd like to thank Tobias. And I didn't tell you how to do this. I told you what had to be done. We have to pass national climate legislation, and we have to encourage other people to figure out how to do that. How you do that is another subject that I didn't cover.
2 minutes.
Okay, thank you. One thing that happens to me when I go to street fairs or I'm standing in front of a group or talking with people, they say, you're preaching to the choir. You're preaching to the choir. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you're only part of the choir, you're not helping. The choir doesn't go out and convince other people. If you're part of the choir, you're part of the problem. You need to go out and be a missionary. You need to tell other people. That's why I said, you and I have to take responsibility. Okay. Maybe you got a minute left.